All right, so we're driving into the I Ching today.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, hexagram 60 Qi.
Okay.
You know that ancient Chinese text people have been turning to for advice for like centuries?
Yeah.
It was your pick, by the way, so major kudos for the intriguing source material.
Well, thank you.
Qi is all about limitation or moderation.
Right.
But honestly, the deeper we go, the more I think those translations don't quite capture it.
It's true. Those single words they don't encompass all the layers of meaning, you know?
Right. It's like trying to sum up a whole philosophy in a soundbite.
Yeah, exactly.
So where do we even begin with something this dense? What's the first thing that grabs you when you look at hexagram 60?
Well, the image at its core is incredibly evocative. A pond gradually filling with water.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does a pond scream limitation to you?
Well, think about it. The pond's banks are what allow the water to collect in the first place. They create a boundary, a container for all that potential. Without those limitations, the water would just spread out and dissipate, right? No depth, no force.
So it's not about restriction, but rather about the right kind of structure?
Exactly.
Oh.
And this idea is echoed throughout Ji.
Interesting.
The text even connects it to Jiam Taigong,
Oh,
a
wow.
legendary strategist who helped found a dynasty.
Wait, the guy who was all about timing and knowing when to make a move. I remember reading about him.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And the I Ching is highlighting his success as an example of Ji in action.
Okay.
Jiang Taigong didn't just rush into things. He recognized the right moment, and he understood that even when acting, there were limits to what he could achieve at any given time.
So it's like strategic patience. That almost sounds counterintuitive, like waiting for the perfect moment rather than forcing things.
Yeah, that tension between action and restraint is a huge part of what Ji explores. And the text doesn't shy away from the fortune-telling element either.
Oh, really?
It actually states that following this path leads to joy and disasters averted.
Okay, hold on. We're not turning this into a crystal ball session, are we?
No, not quite.
Okay.
Remember, this text is thousands of years old.
Right.
The way they viewed the world was different.
Yeah.
I see those pronouncements as reflecting how the ancient Chinese saw the natural consequences of actions. Like making wise choices leads to joy, while recklessness brings disaster.
So it's less about predicting the future and more about understanding cause and effect, right?
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating is how specific Ji gets when it comes to applying this to everyday life.
Oh, wow.
Like, we're talking love, health, even things like finding lost items or dealing with legal trouble.
Okay, hold that thought. We'll come back to that after a quick message. Don't go anywhere because we're just getting started.
Sounds good.
So before the break, we were teasing all that juicy, specific advice that Ji offers.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff were we talking about here?
Well, Ji touches on love health, even things like finding lost items or dealing with legal trouble. It's surprisingly down to earth for an ancient text.
Okay, spill the tea. Let's start with love.
Okay.
What kind of guidance does Ji give?
It's cryptic, to be honest.
Okay.
One line says, if men and women interact normally, it will be auspicious, otherwise it will be ominous.
Interact normally? That feels so vague.
Right.
What did normal even mean back then?
That's where the historical context gets interesting.
Yeah.
In ancient China, societal norms were very strict, especially around relationships.
Right.
Think arranged marriages, very specific roles for men and women.
Ah.
So normal interaction likely meant following those established rules.
Okay.
Stepping outside those boundaries was seen as inviting trouble.
So it's like Ji saying, play by the rules and you'll be all right, but go rogue and things might get messy.
That's one way to interpret it.
Yeah.
Of course, our ideas of normal and relationships have evolved drastically since then.
Right.
But the underlying principle is interesting, right?
Uh-huh.
Even today, relationships thrive on some level of agreed upon boundaries and expectations.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like freedom within a framework, just like that pond analogy.
Exactly.
Okay, what about this health advice I keep hearing about?
Ji specifically warns about issues with the urinary and digestive systems.
What?
It even advises seeking medical help right away if those areas are acting up.
Wow, that's wild. Thousands of years ago, they were already onto the importance of gut health and stuff.
It goes to show that certain aspects of human experience are timeless.
Yeah.
Even if the methods of addressing them have changed.
Right.
Now, if we shift gears to the structure of the hexagram itself...
You mean those individual lines within Ji that get super specific?
Yeah.
I'll be honest, some of them make my head spin.
Yeah.
Like not quitting the courtyard. What am I supposed to do with that?
Those lines can seem confusing at first glance.
Yeah.
But they add nuance to Ji's overall message.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about yin and yang lines making up the hexagram?
Yeah, the broken and solid lines, right?
Right.
But I still don't get how their position changes the meaning.
Okay, so each line represents a stage or aspect of the situation G describes.
Okay.
And where a yin or yang line falls within the hexagram influences how it's interpreted. For example, a yin line at the top might indicate weakness, while a yang line in the same spot could suggest strength.
So it's like each line adds another layer to the story G is telling.
Exactly. And when you understand how to read them, the lines provide incredibly specific guidance.
Okay.
For instance, that line about not quitting the courtyard
is
actually talking about the importance of staying focused and not giving up on your goals even when things get tough.
Ah, so it's about perseverance.
Yeah.
That makes way more sense than me literally never leaving my house.
Right. And there's another line that really struck me.
Okay.
Bitter limitation cannot be correct.
Ooh, that sounds intense. What's G getting at there?
It's acknowledging that following the path of moderation isn't always easy or pleasant.
Right.
Sometimes sticking to those limits requires discipline sacrifice. It can even feel bitter, as the text says.
It's like you might have to say no to some fun stuff in the short term to achieve what you really want in the long run.
Precisely. G isn't pretending this is a walk in the park.
Right.
But it's suggesting that those bitter limitations are ultimately necessary for growth and fulfillment. And that brings us back to the core message balance.
Yeah.
G isn't about denying ourselves or becoming hermits.
Right.
It's about finding that sweet spot where we can thrive within limitations.
So, listener, what's resonating with you most about G so far? The pond imagery. The ancient health advice. Those cryptic lines. Think about it while we
Wrap up.
wrap up this part of our deep dive. We're back, and I'm still pondering all this talk about limitations leading to joy and avoiding disaster.
Right.
It's quite the promise.
It is.
And, it reminds me of that reference to Jiang Taigong.
Yeah.
We talked about him being a strategic genius, but the I Ching goes beyond just mentioning him. It's using his life as a kind of case study for G. So how does his story connect to this idea of limitations leading to positive outcomes?
Well, Jiang Taigong is famous for helping establish the Zhou dynasty, but his path to power was anything but straightforward.
Okay.
He spent years in relative obscurity, working as a fisherman, and even feigning madness to avoid attracting unwanted attention.
Whoa, playing the long game.
Right.
He was basically limiting his own actions, even his outward personality.
Yeah.
Until the perfect moment arrived.
Exactly. And once the opportunity arose, he was ready. He had honed his skills, observed his rivals, and formulated a plan.
Okay.
When he finally acted, his success was swift and decisive.
So it's like the pond analogy taken to a whole new level.
Right.
He built up that potential energy within those self-imposed limitations.
Yeah.
And when the time was right, bam, he made a huge impact.
That's a great way to put it.
It's not just about passively accepting limitations. It's about leveraging them strategically to achieve your goals.
Exactly.
I still can't shake this feeling of, skepticism, I guess, about the fortune-telling element.
Yeah.
Like, how much of this is ancient wisdom versus, just old superstitions?
That's a fair question. And honestly, I think it's okay to approach those aspects with a healthy dose of critical thinking.
Okay.
It's important to remember that the I Ching emerged from a very different worldview than ours.
Right. They saw fate and destiny as much more fixed than we tend to today.
Exactly. So instead of viewing those pronouncements about joy and disaster as literal predictions,
Okay.
I see them as symbolic representations of potential outcomes.
So more like if you make choices aligned with this principle of moderation, things are more likely to work out well for you.
Precisely. It's about understanding the natural consequences of our actions, even if it's not as mystical as it might sound on the surface.
That makes you feel a lot better. It's the power back in our hands, right? We're not just puppets of fate.
Exactly. And ultimately, whether you believe in the divination aspect or not, there's still a wealth of practical wisdom in G and in the I Ching as a whole.
Couldn't agree more. This whole deep dive has been mind-blowing.
It's been a fascinating exploration. And I think it highlights something really important even thousands of years later. These ancient texts still have the power to challenge our assumptions and offer new perspectives on how we live our lives.
Absolutely. And, as we wrap up, I keep thinking about how much we've focused on G in terms of personal development. But what if we zoom out a little?
Okay.
Could this idea of limitation have relevance on a larger scale, like for society as a whole?
That's a thought-provoking question.
Like we're facing some pretty complex challenges today. Climate change, social inequality, political polarization.
Right.
Maybe G's message of balance and moderation could offer some guidance as we navigate these issues.
Yeah, it's a conversation worth having for sure.
How do we balance individual freedoms with the needs of the collective?
Right.
How do we set boundaries that promote sustainability and well-being for everyone?
Maybe, just maybe, the wisdom of G can offer a starting point for finding solutions that work for all of us.
That's a great note to end on. So to our listener, we hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas and maybe even a bit of introspection.
I agree.
Remember, the I Ching is a source of endless contemplation.
It is.
Whether you take it literally or figuratively, it's a powerful tool for understanding ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, stay curious.